About to get into an interesting discussion. Now, the law hasn't actually changed, but enforcing that law will, and that could essentially change everything in the world of medical marijuana. You see, the Obama administration is now telling the 14 states that allow medical marijuana that it will still go after drug traffickers, but they won't have to look over their shoulder because the Fed is no longer chasing the users of the medical marijuana, or the sellers for that matter. The new strategy is a reversal from the Bush administration, which said it could go after dispensaries, and customers anytime federal law was broken. More now from CNN's Jean Meserve.
At North Hollywood Compassionate Caregivers, a marijuana dispensary, relief that the federal government will no longer target legitimate users of medical marijuana.
Puts less stress on us. We don't have to worry about, dealing with all that. I've gotten pulled over before for it.
Attorney General Eric Holder says it will no longer be a priority to use federal resources to prosecute patients with serious illnesses or their caregivers who are complying with state laws.
This is a watershed moment and a major step forward in terms of federal medical marijuana policy.
But opponents of medical marijuana found something to cheer too. A memo to federal prosecutors outlining the new guidelines says prosecution of commercial enterprises that unlawfully market and sell marijuana for profit continues to be an enforcement priority.
We see these guidelines as giving clarity, allowing law enforcement to move forward and enforce our federal laws and shut down these storefront operations that are nothing more than a free ticket for drug trafficking.
The Bush administration prosecuted marijuana dispensaries and their customers when a federal drug law was violated. The new memo leaves open that possibility, but suggests prosecutors defer to state laws in the 14 states which permit medical marijuana.
People are still just as subject to prosecution, and I don't think that part of the message is going to get out, and I think that it's going to make a already confused situation more chaotic.
The Justice Department took pains to underline that drug enforcement is still a core priority, noting that marijuana distribution in the United States remains the single largest source of revenue for the Mexican drug cartels. Jean Meserve, CNN, Washington.
Smoke your pot in peace. That's the word from the Obama administration to medical marijuana users in the states that allow it. The Fed, as I mentioned, no longer chasing you, but we are chasing the debate with our blogger bunch today, and we have some really interesting bloggers today. First of all, Calvina Fay. She is executive director of the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. You can find her site at drugfree.org. Calvina, a pleasure to have you.
Good morning.
Also want to welcome Neil Franklin from LEAP.cc. That is Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. He had worked in Maryland for many years for law enforcement, and his tune has changed a bit since he was working there. It's great to see you here. And finally, Keith Stroop, founder of NORML. You can find them at NORML.org. By the way, that stands for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. So we want to welcome all of you here. Let me first start with Calvina. So when you first heard of this information coming from Washington, D.C., that the Obama administration was going to change the policy that was long held under the Bush administration, what was your reaction?
Well, first of all, the guidelines that were issued yesterday are simply putting into writing the policy that was announced back in January. And it really isn't much of a deviation from what has been practiced. If you look at how our drug laws were enforced and who the drug enforcement agencies were arresting under both the Bush and the Clinton administration, it really hasn't changed because it hasn't been their practice to go after patients and sick and dying people, but rather to go after those that are trafficking in drugs, that are peddling drugs to our kids, and that are putting our communities at risk. So we really haven't seen much of a change here in the focus of policy.
And are you okay with that?
Well, I think that going after drug dealers and going after those that are profiting other people by misleading sick people to think that marijuana could be helpful to them and making it easier for our kids to use drugs, absolutely. I think that we should be focusing on them and going after them, which is what DEA has been doing for a number of years now.
But just so I have your position straight, are you fine with the fact that the administration, as you put it, isn't necessarily changing their enforcement? It seems to me they're changing what they're saying. But if the enforcement is going to be the same as it was in previous administrations, are you okay with that? Are you okay with not going after states that allow medical marijuana?
Well, like I said, I don't think that there really has been a change. they have not said, in fact, they clearly say in these guidelines that law enforcement does have the discretion to go after even users if they see that that's in the best interest of the overall picture. But it has never been the priority of the DEA to go after the users. They go after the people that might possess large amounts of drugs, that are committing other crimes that might be drug related, and certainly those that are trafficking in drugs. And I think we'll see that continue with these guidelines. So I really don't see that the guidelines have really changed what the practice is.
All right, Keith Stroup from normal.org. Do you think this is a change? Because there are a lot of people saying that this is a fundamental shift.
Oh, I think it's a significant change in policy. For the last 8 years, the federal government has alleged that there is no such thing as a medical use of marijuana, and anyone who possesses or uses it is a criminal, even if you're a dying cancer patient or an AIDS patient or an MS patient. Obama, during the campaign, said he would not use federal resources to continue to go after and prosecute patients and caregivers in the 13 states where they have legalized medical use under state law. He would no longer allow federal resources to interfere in that. They would leave those people alone. So I think it's a 180-degree change in policy, and I think there are tens of thousands of seriously ill patients all over this country who feel much safer today than they did 2 days ago.
Neil Franklin, you for 32 years you were with law enforcement. You were a veteran commander there. In fact, you worked with the Division of Bureau of Drug and Criminal Enforcement there in Maryland. Since leaving that, you are now part of an organization that appears to be in favor of decriminalizing marijuana. So what was your reaction when you heard this response from the Obama administration? Did you see it as a big change?
Oh, this was huge. This was a monumental step forward. And I'd like to say that even though the feds, and it was said earlier by your guest that the feds weren't pursuing users of medical marijuana, but let me say local law enforcement and at the state level, we have been pursuing over the years anyone who used marijuana, anyone who possessed marijuana, no matter what they're called. But now that the federal government has come out and said that they're no longer going to pursue users of medical marijuana, this is huge. This is a huge message given out to local law enforcement and at the state level as well. This is a huge step towards regulation and control. Over the past 40 years, there has been virtually no regulation and control over marijuana. Now we're taking a step in that direction, and that is what will keep it out of the hands of our young people. Regulation and control.
Calvina, I know that you have made a case